Unlike other Microsoft Office programs, Excel does not provide a button to number data automatically. Adding serial numbers manually is a pain. Moreover, they will be static and will not renumber automatically by adding or removing records. Product IDs, serial numbers for transactions, require a unique identifier that skips blanks and renumbers automatically when adding or deleting records. I am Nabil Murad. The good news is there are simple formulas that can automatically add serial numbers in a column following any pattern we like, skipping blanks, and have them renumber when deleting or adding new records. In this tutorial, I show you 18 different work situations for dynamically numbering records in Excel. So let's dive in. Here is my start file. You can download the exercise file and follow along by clicking on the link below this video. In this tutorial, I show you different methods to creating incremental number. And I'm going to start with the very basics, a static technique for creating a column of incremental number. I'm selecting cell A4 and I type number 1 and then I hit Ctrl Enter. Now to create a column of incremental number, I'll be using the autofill handle, the small square in the lower right corner. When I hover over it, the mouse pointer changes to a small plus sign. I press and keep holding down the Control key and I drag all the way down, and that creates a column of incremental number. The problem with this column is that it numbers the blank records as well, and if you delete a record or add a new record, well, numbering is not affected. And if you apply a sorting by going to the Data tab and then I click on A to Z, then all the numbers are messed up. And that's why I say this technique is not a preferred one. We can use a little better technique. So I can use the ROW function, and the ROW function extracts the row number. So if I select D4 and I type equal row, and then I hit the tab key, and I want the row of cell A1, and I close the bracket. Now if I copy down, that's a little bit better, although it counts also the blank records. But if you apply a sorting, then the ROW function renumbers. I can also create a column of Roman numbers by combining the ROW function with the Roman function. So I'm selecting cell G4 and I type equal row, and then I open bracket. I want the row of A1. That will return number 1, as I did before. But if I put it in the edit mode and then I wrap the ROW function in a Roman function, then I hit tab and then I close the bracket for the Roman function. That returns Roman number. I can click and drag all the way down. You can also use the series functionality to create a series of numbers in a column or in a row. So if I select cell K1 and I type 1 and then I hit Ctrl Enter, I want to create a series that increments by 1 for 25,000 cells. And to do this, I go to the Home tab of the ribbon, and to the right side of the Home tab, I click on the down arrow for Fill, and from here I select Series. The Series dialog box opens, and here I say I want my series in a column. I want the step value to be 1, and I want to stop, let's say, at 25,000. When I hit OK, I would have created a column showing 25,000 incremental number. If I double-click on the lower border of the top cell, now I can see I stopped at 25,000, and I'm going to jump back to the top. What we created so far is static. Let's see other examples. I'm going to move to the next worksheet, and I called it semi-dynamic because it's a little bit better. Here, I want to show you that not only you can create a column of incremental numbers, but you can also create a column of decremental numbers. This time I'll be using the rows function with an S, and I'm selecting cell B4, and I type equal rows with an S, and the rows function counts how many rows do we have in a range we select. I'm selecting the range from B4 to B20, and I close the bracket. And for the rows function to decrement, I need to create a shrinking range. So I'm going to click in the second cell reference, and I want to lock it by hitting F4. That means it doesn't change as I go down, while the first reference will change, and that will create a decremental range. Let's hit Control Enter and check. I would have created number 17 if I drag all the way down, then I created a column of decremental numbers. I can also create a column of numbers that start with 4 digits. So to do this, I'm going to select cell E4, and I'll be typing equal row, and then I hit the tab key, but this time I'll be selecting cell A1001. When I close the bracket and hit enter, now I created the first number 1001, and if I click and drag downward, I'm incrementing with 4 digits. In some work situations, you might want to have leading zeros. So I'm going to create a function that returns 3 digits with leading zeros. And to do this, I'm selecting cell H4, and I'll be typing equal sign, and in double quotation, I'm going to type 000, 000, and then I close the double quotation. And then I want to join the 000 to a row function. So I type the joining operator of Excel Shift 7, the ampersand, the and symbol, and I type row of A1. When I close the bracket and hit enter, now it's returning 0001. If I copy all the way down, now I have a little issue. Some of the numbers are 4 digits, some of the numbers are 5 digits. I just want to keep 3 digits from the right side. With my range selected, I put it in the edit mode by hitting F2, and I'm going to wrap all that inside a write function. I click at the beginning and I type write, and then I hit tab and then click at the end. How many digits or characters you want, I type comma 3 and I close the bracket and then hit Control Enter, and what remains are only 3 digits. Note they are left aligned because the write function is a text function. We want to switch to a much more dynamic technique that gives us everything we expect. So I'm going to move to the next worksheet, Dynamic, and in this worksheet, I'm going to give you different options. I want to create a function that looks at the column to the right. If it has no contents, then it shows nothing. But if it has contents, it keeps counting and incrementing. And if I delete a row or I insert a record, then it renumbers automatically. So I'm selecting cell A4 and I'll be typing equal if. And when I hit the tab key, I want to look at the cell to my right, so I hit the right arrow to select it, and I say if it is equal blank, double quote, and then I hit a comma. What's the value if true? Then I want nothing, double quote, and then I hit comma. What if it's not blank? If it's not blank, then I want to count. I want to look at the maximum of the column and add 1. So I'll be typing max, and then I hit tab. Max of what? Max of the cell above, A3, and then I want the same cell one more time, so I hit Shift : and I close the bracket. Note that I want to look at the maximum of the cell above. Right now, the max function won't count a text, so it will return 0, but what I want is to start at 1, so I'll be adding 1. Before I leave the max function, I want to create an expandable range. So I click in the first cell reference and I hit F4 to lock it, and now I can close the bracket for the if function. When I close the bracket for the if function, I get number 1. And when I copy down, it keeps looking at the cell above and adding 1. What happens when I reach a blank? Then here the if function is moving to the second argument. In case it's blank, return nothing, and that's wonderful. I'm going to copy all the way down, and that's exactly what I want. Let's see what happens if I delete a value. So if I delete a value from column B by hitting the delete key, everything is renumbering. If I delete another value, then everything renumbers. What if I type a new value? I'm going to type my name, Nabil Murad, and when I hit enter, everything is dynamic and renumbers. Then this technique is dynamic. Let's see another option. I'm selecting cell D4 and I'm going to create a different function. It will be also wrapped in an if function, but it's a COUNTA function. So let's see how we do that. So I type equal if and then I hit tab. And then I use my arrow to select the cell to my right, E4, and I'm asking, is it equal to nothing? Is it blank? Double quote, and then I hit comma. What do you want to do if it's blank? Then I want nothing, double quote. Otherwise, what would you like to do? I want to count. So I'm going to type COUNTA. The COUNTA function is a function that counts non-blanks, and then I hit the right arrow to select E4, and I want to add the same cell one more time. So I hit Shift colon and I close the bracket for the COUNTA function. Before leaving the COUNTA function, I want to create an expandable range. So I put my blinking cursor in the first reference and then I hit F4. Don't forget to close the bracket for the if function. When I hit enter, this function is returning 1, and if I click and drag all the way down, then it is dynamic, and like the previous one, if you delete a record, then everything renumbers, and if you type a value, it will be included as well. The next function is pretty close to this one. It's the subtotal function. The subtotal function can be used as a replacement for 11 different functions. It can replace the average, the max, the min, and other functions, including the COUNTA function. So let's use the subtotal function. Equal if. And then I hit tab. I want to evaluate the cell to my right, cell H4, and then I type an equal sign and say, is it blank? Double quote, and then comma. If it is blank, what do you want to do? I want nothing, double quote, and then comma. What if it's not blank? Then I want to use the subtotal function. So I type subtotal, and then I hit the tab key. The subtotal function is a replacement for 11 functions. So the first argument of the subtotal function is to specify how would you like to use it. I want to use it as a replacement to the COUNTA. So I select number 3 and then I hit tab. And then I hit comma, where is the range that you want to use for the subtotal function. Then I want to select cell H4, so I hit my right arrow to select it, and then I hit Shift colon to select the same cell one more time, and I close the bracket for the subtotal function. To create an expandable range, I have to put my blinking cursor in the first reference and lock it by hitting F4. Don't forget to close the bracket for the if function. And the subtotal function right now is behaving typically like the COUNTA because I'm using number 3. In my next technique, I'm going to convert my list into a table. So I'm switching to the table worksheet, and I want to convert this list into a table. There are different ways of doing that. The easiest one is to select any single cell, and because table starts with letter T, so if I hit Control T, and then I hit enter. My list has been converted to a table. Let's create our if function as we did before. I'm going to create it in cell B4. So I type equal if, and then I hit the tab. Now if I hit my right arrow to select the cell to my right, Excel will be using the table nomenclature. So I ask, is it equal to double quote? If it is blank, what do you want to do? I type a comma, and I type double quote one more time. If it's not blank, I'm going to use any one of the previous techniques. So let's say I type row, I open bracket and I type A1 and I close the bracket for the row function and I close the bracket for the if function. When I hit enter, there is a feature in tables called formula replication that will populate this formula in the entire range. Let's switch to the next worksheet, Modular. And in this worksheet, we have a different situation. I would like to create a modular pattern. What does it mean, a modular pattern? It means I want to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then start recounting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And instead of being limited to 5, I type this number in cell C1, and I can change it later on. So I'm going to use the mod function. What does the mod function do? The mod function returns the remainder of a division. What if I say equal mod? And then I want the mod of row 1. So I type row, and I open bracket A1. When I close the bracket, that's the first argument of the mod function. That's the number that I'm going to divide. I type a comma. What's your divisor? My divisor comes from cell C1, so I can change it at any time. And because I'm copying down, I want to lock cell C1, and I close the bracket. And just imagine 1 divided by 5. The remainder will be 1. Let's check. Then when I hit enter, it's returning 1. What if I copy down? Remember, the row number is increasing as I copy down. So when I copy down, what do I get? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So yes, I get 5 numbers, but I want always to start at 1, not at 0. So I'm going to select my function one more time, put it in the edit mode F2, and I say +1, and then I hit Control Enter. Now the second set has been fixed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if I copy further down, I have the correct pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. But what I would like to do is to fix the first one and start at 1. So I'm going to hit the F2 one more time, and I say I want the mod of row A1 -1. Now if I hit Control Enter, I get exactly what I want. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. If I change this number in cell C1, and let's say I make it 4, everything will adjust automatically, and I get a modular pattern of 4 numbers. I want to understand what's happening under the hood. So I'm going to select one of the numbers along the way, and I'll go to the Formulas tab of the ribbon. And on the Formulas tab of the ribbon, I want to use the Formula Evaluator. So I click on Evaluate Formula, and here I can see the same function that I have inside the cell, but part of it is underlined. The part that is underlined is what Excel is going to evaluate first. This tool shows me how Excel is processing any calculation. So when I click on Evaluate, row A4 will be replaced by its value, which is actually 4. And then it will be subtracting the 1. So when I hit Evaluate one more time, then it's returning 3. Then C1 will be replaced by its value, which is currently 4. So now I have 3 divided by 4. 3 divided by 4 has a remainder of 3. And if I add 1, then I end up by getting 4. Let's close and test it somewhere else. Let's select another one. And I want to use the Formula Evaluator one more time. I click on Evaluate Formula. When I hit Evaluate row A7, that returns 7, -1, that returns 6, and then I want to replace the divisor C1 by 4. 6 divided by 4 returns 1, and the remainder is 2. 2 plus 1 will return 3 to the cell, and now we understand the concept of this function. I'm going to close. Sometimes you want to create a modular pattern for a weekly activity. So in this case, I can use a completely different technique. So let's switch to the next worksheet. And here I want to use a weekday function. We know that a date is stored in Excel as a number. Day number 1 is the 1st of January 1900. So what if I extract the weekday of day number 1? So I'll be typing equal weekday. Weekday of what? Of row A1. And I close the bracket for the row, and I close the bracket for the weekday function. And because the row function of A1 will be returning 1, then the weekday of number 1, of the serial number 1, that will be 1. I'm not providing the second argument of the weekday function, which is a return type. I'm just accepting the default. So I delete the comma and I close the bracket and then I hit enter. This function is returning 1, and as I copy down, it will be returning a weekly pattern. 1 to 7 and then 1 to 7 and then 1 to 7. I have a conditional formatting that highlights the beginning of each new week. I'm going to switch to the next worksheet, Quotient, and in this situation, I want a modular pattern, but that doesn't increment automatically. I want a modular pattern, let's say of 5, so it shows number 1 5 times, then it shows number 2 5 times, then it increments and shows number 3 5 times, and so on. To do this, I'm going to use the quotient function. What does the quotient function do? 11 divided by 2 equals 5, and the remainder is 1. 11 is the dividend, 2 is the divisor, 5 is the quotient, and 1 is the remainder. The quotient function returns the quotient of a division, and the mod function calculates the remainder. Now let's select cell A3, and I'll be typing equal quotient, and then I hit tab. Quotient of what? Quotient of row A1. And I close the bracket for the row function. Row A1, that's the numerator, that will be 1. And then I hit comma. What about the denominator? The denominator will come from cell E1. And because I intend to copy down, then I want to lock my denominator. So now let's think. Quotient of 1 and the divisor or the denominator is 5. That should return a 0, and this is what we are getting. But I want to start at 1, so I'm going to put my function in the edit mode, F2, and I want to add 1, so I type +1. Now when I hit enter, I'm starting at 1. Would it give me what I expect? Let me copy all the way down and check. Now it's giving me a pattern. 2, 2, 2, 5 times, 3, 3, 3, 5 times, but for the number 1, it's giving me only 4 times, so I need to make a little modification. I hit F2, and then I say, I want row A1 minus 1. That means I'm starting at 0, and the denominator is 5. When I hit Control Enter, now I'm getting exactly what I want. I have duplicate ones 5 times, and then I have number 2 repeated 5 times, and 3 and 4, so I'm incrementing with a different pattern. If I change the 5 and I make it 3, then the pattern changes on the fly. I want to understand what this function is doing behind the scene, so I select it and I want to open the formula evaluator one more time. This time I want to use the shortcut Alt-TUF, and it opens the dialog box. We need to understand how Excel is processing this function. So if I click on Evaluate, then A3 is replaced by 3. If I subtract 1, that becomes 2. And then it will replace E1 by the number in E1, which is currently 3. And then 2 will be divided by 3. And this part returns a 0. Within the quotient function, if I add 1, that returns 1. Let me change and make it 5 one more time. And now let's select one of the twos and open the formula evaluator, Alt-TUF. And in the formula evaluator, I want to understand what's going on. Row of A8, I click evaluate, it becomes 8. And then if I click evaluate one more time to subtract the 1, that will become 7. And then 7 divided by 5 coming from cell E1, that will return an integer of 1 and the remainder of 2. So if I click here, it says 1, and because I'm adding 1, that returns 2, and that gives me the pattern that I'm expecting. What if I want the same exact pattern? I want to repeat a certain number, and then I want to increment after, let's say, 5 rows, and then I want to increment after 5 more rows, and so on. But I don't want to read these duplicates. Let's see what I mean. I'm going to move to the next worksheet, No Repeat, and in the next worksheet, I want to create the same exact quotient function that I created a while ago. So I type equal quotient, and then I hit tab. I want the quotient of row A1, and I close the bracket. And as I explained before, because I want to start at 0, so I'll be subtracting 1, and then I hit comma. What's the denominator? The denominator will come from cell E1, and I lock the denominator. I close the bracket, and then when I hit enter, I'm getting a 0. So as we did before, I put it in the edit mode, and I'm adding 1 plus 1. This will give me the pattern that we created in the previous activity. So when I hit enter, and now I can copy down, I will see 1 repeated 5 times, and then 2 repeated 5 times, and so on. What I would like to do is to make a little change. So instead of having the number repeated 5 times, I want to see the first occurrence only. And that will require putting this function in a conditional if function. Let me explain what I mean, and I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'll be copying this little part because I will need it one more time. Control C to copy, and then I hit escape, and I put my function in the edit mode by hitting F2. I click before the quotient function, and I say if, and I hit tab. If the mod, and I hit tab, and I paste Control V. If the mod of all this part is equal to 0, and then comma, what do you want to do? I want to run my quotient function. Otherwise, I click at the end, and I type comma, I want nothing, double quote, and I close the bracket. We need to understand what this function is doing. The mod function will return a 0 only with the first occurrence, and that's why we'll be able to read the first occurrence. With the subsequent occurrences, it's not returning 0, then I want to see nothing inside the cell. Let's hit Control Enter, and I'm getting exactly what I want. Let me check. I'm going to select, let's say, the first occurrence, and I want to open my formula evaluator. On the Formulas tab, I click on Evaluate Formula, and here is my formula evaluator. Let's understand how Excel is processing this function. When I click Evaluate, the underlined part will be replaced by its value, which is 1. 1 minus 1, that's the underlined part now, that becomes 0. The divisor is E1, it will be replaced by its value 5. What's the remainder of 0 divided by 5? Then the remainder is 0. Is it equal to 0? Yes, it is. It's returning a true. Accordingly, we go to the second part of the if function, which is the quotient function. So when I hit evaluate one more time, now it's processing the quotient function, and the quotient function ends up, as I explained before, by returning the 1. Now let me close and select one of the occurrences where the mod function is not returning a 0. I click on Evaluate Formula, and then when I hit Evaluate, 3 minus 1 equals 2, and then E1 will be replaced by 5. What's the mod of 2, 5? It's 2. Then it's not equal to 0, it's returning a false, and accordingly it will go to the last part of the if function, and it's returning nothing. That's the concept of this function, the quotient function. I used the mod function first in the modular division, and then I used the quotient function, and then I combined both of them together, the mod and the quotient and the if function. Let's move to the last worksheet, sequence, and if you are using Office 365, then you should have access to dynamic array functions, and I'm going to create an incremental pattern by using dynamic arrays. So I'm selecting cell B1, and I'll be using the sequence function, equal sequence, and then I hit tab. How many rows do you want? Let's say I want 20 rows. And then I hit comma. How many columns? I want one single column. And then comma. What's your start number? I want to start at 1. And then comma. What's the step? I want to increment by 1, so I type 1. As simple as this. When I hit enter, because it's a dynamic array function, then it will spill to the adjacent range. When I hit enter, now it spills to the adjacent range. As you may already know, the function lives in the first cell only, and if you select any other cell and look at the formula bar, it's grayed out because the function doesn't live in this cell, the function lives in the top cell only. Can I use the sequence function to create a column of decremental numbers? Yes, definitely. So I'm selecting cell E1 and I type equal sequence. and I hit tab, I want 20 rows, and then comma, I want one single column, and then comma, what's your start number? I want to start at 20, which is the biggest number. And then I want to decrement, so I type comma, -1. The step is -1. When I close the bracket, then I'm creating a column of decremental number. Can we use the sequence function to increment with a pattern? Yes, we can. So if I select cell H1 and I type equal sequence, and then I hit tab, I want 20 rows, and then comma, I want one single column, and then comma, I want to start at 1, and then I hit comma, but for the step, I want to increment, let's say, by 3. When I close the bracket and hit enter, I'm creating a column of incremental number that increments by 3, which is what I specified in the fourth argument of the sequence function. I showed you 18 methods to create a column of incremental numbers. We made it dynamic. It skips the blanks, and it renumbers whether you add or whether you delete a record. And if you enjoyed this training video, give it a thumbs up. And consider subscribing to my channel. And ring the bell to be notified when new tutorials are released. The best is yet to come. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.